Laughter Out of Place sheds light on many issues that Brazil has faced in the past years and even now in the 21st century. Goldstein makes the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, the main group of study in her ethnography. The book follows Gloria, her family, and the trials they face day to day in their favela of Felicidade Eterna. Gloria is a regular domestic worker from the favela. Her story shows the discrimination against people of color, women, and people of a lower socioeconomic class in Brazil. The stories of the favelas also highlight the gang violence and bribes by policemen, which directly mirror the inner workings of the Brazilian government. Women in Brazil are second-class citizens. Their lives are inherently harder than that of a male in any social class, not just in the favelas. Former woman president Dilma Rousseff, during the trial of her impeachment, shows this trait as well. Rousseff's impeachment in general can be argued as discrimination against women. She was impeached because she falsified and doctored the federal budget, but, as her lawyer stated, men before her had done the exact same thing and nothing happened to them. Because of this, it can be argued that politics and government have a direct effect on the people living in favelas. With the election of Bolsonaro, women specifically in the favelas, such as Gloria, will be affected in a negative way. Because of deeply rooted gender, racial, and class divides in Brazil, Bolsonaro's goals are detrimental to women specifically. The New York Times article by Simon Romero, written in 2016, is a direct example of sexism that is present in Brazil. The former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached in late 2016 by a Senate hearing and vote. Brazil's Senate is comprised of 81 seats, 3 delegates from each of the 26 states, and 3 senators from the federal district, which are elected based on majority to serve 8 years. This Senate is mostly comprised of white or lighter-skinned males. The ratio of women to men is small because of Brazil's political sexism. In 2016, a woman came to the Senate asking for the impeachment of the then-president Dilma Rousseff because of the alleged federal budget forgery. The Senate then began an investigation and hearing of Ms. Rousseff, and she was formally impeached in August of 2016. Rousseff was Brazil's first female president, but did not get to finish her term due to immediate removal from the position. The Workers' Party in Brazil, of which Rousseff and her predecessor, Lula da Silva, belonged, had governed Brazil for 13 years and was instrumental to an economic boom which pulled millions of citizens out of poverty. During trial, Rousseff repeatedly stated that she did nothing illegal and that her predecessors also manipulated the federal budget. Before her predecessor, Lula da Silva, named her the leader of the Workers' Party, Rousseff had not held an elected political position. Romero describes Rousseff's rise to president as an exception in the male-dominated political scene. This male-dominated political scene to which the author refers is not only political but domestic, cultural, and protruding, as we see from Goldstein's Laughter Out of Place. Men, as Goldstein describes them, are the figureheads of society. The men hold the power in relationships over women, so Rousseff becoming president was such a feat for women in Brazil. But it shocked and angered a lot of others who believe that women are not capable of holding such a role in society. Even other women in the Senate voiced their opinions of a woman as president in Rousseff's impeachment trial. A woman senator from Rousseff's own party voiced her crude opinion during the trial when she stated, "You veered from the narrative when you were elected president of the Republic as a woman from the left, a former militant against the dictatorship without a husband to pose by your side in the photographs." When the few women in positions of power are attacked because of their gender, other women see that they cannot ever be in those kinds of positions. Women in Brazil are attacked by the men, the citizenry, and sometimes by other women. This sort of outlook has a detrimental effect on the population in the coming years, as we see from Bolsonaro's election in 2018.
Dilma Rousseff's impeachment connects to Laughter Out of Place in many ways. One way in which these two connect is how they both emphasize the poor economic conditions in Brazil. Rousseff was impeached because she manipulated the federal budget. While there is no excuse for attempting to conceal budget deficits, it is clear that Rousseff's intention was to mask the severity of the economic issues her country was facing. Goldstein illustrates how these economic issues impact the day-to-day lives of Brazilians throughout Laughter Out of Place. While detailing the history of Brazil, she mentions how Brazil experienced absolute economic growth during the 1970s that resulted in both a debt crisis and an increase in income inequality across social classes. This ever-increasing economic inequality causes a sharp contrast between how the lower and upper classes can live their lives. Using Gloria and her family, Goldstein highlights the fact that the poor are trapped in an endless cycle of poverty from which they cannot escape, while it is easy for the rich to maintain their wealth. In other words, there is hardly any social mobility in Brazil, and the nature of the country's economy contributes to this. Therefore, it is no surprise that Dilma Rousseff was caught doing something many of her predecessors also partook in. By attempting to conceal the federal budget deficit, Rousseff was trying to minimize the fact that the government over which she resides is not economically stable enough to support its own people. Rousseff's impeachment also sheds light on a different aspect of life in Brazil: discrimination against women. While Rousseff was indeed corrupt and therefore fairly impeached, the way in which the country reacted to her scandal shows the pervasiveness of gender inequality in Brazil. Instead of directly attacking her character, her opponents instead attacked her on the basis of her family, saying they impeached her for the sake of her grandchildren. This shows that, even as the president of a country, Rousseff was still thought of as a family member instead of an individual, independent woman. In Laughter Out of Place, Goldstein shows how women in Brazilian favelas face discrimination that sets them back in their lives even more than their male counterparts. These women do not have the same economic opportunities as men, usually employed as domestic workers and spending less time with their families as a result. They also do not have the same sexual freedom as men and are expected to remain monogamous while their husbands may cheat on them. These women are also often used as pawns in disputes between men, being raped or even killed for revenge against their husbands or brothers. Overall, Goldstein shows how favela women's lives are shaped by men and are characterized by extreme inequality and discrimination. The reaction to Rousseff's impeachment shows that this discrimination is not exclusively found in favelas either, but can even reach the most elite women. Therefore, Rousseff's impeachment exemplifies how Brazil's culture is inherently biased against women and prevents them from receiving equal treatment.
October 29th was a very big upset for multiple people in Brazil as Bolsonaro was officially elected as president of Brazil. Not only was it a big upset in Brazil on this day, but the rest of the world as well, as Angela Merkel, Germany's chancellor, steps down as her party's leader, which is the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, which is the center-right party in Germany. In one of the beginning paragraphs in the CNN article, Brazil just elected their version of Donald Trump, talks about how Bolsonaro is a sexist, a homophobic, and a supporter of police brutality. On top of these very negative qualities for a president, he also believes in a military regime which ran Brazil through the 70s and the 80s. He believes that they didn't kill enough of their opponents and wanted guns in the hands of citizens. A quote from Bolsonaro's campaign is, weapons defend our freedom. Bolsonaro's election will have a very negative effect on women and gays because of how he views these two groups. He once said that a woman member of the National Congress was too ugly to be worthy of raping. He has said that if one of his sons were homosexual, he would prefer that he died, and that a police officer who doesn't kill is not a police officer. Since Bolsonaro believes in police brutality, it is convincing the middle class that they need protection from the poorer populations in Brazil, it will lead one to believe that the police and gang presences in the favelas will continue to grow and grow. In Laughter Out of Place, Goldstein talks about the police and gang presences in the favelas. She says that the gangs provided a low-level protection for those in favelas from police, including intervening in family or lover feuds that would possibly bring police in. There are two viewpoints on gangs in Brazil. Those who live in the favelas who believe that the reason the gangs are increasing is because of the police presence and their unnecessary hostility towards the people in favelas, and those who are looking from the outside, like Bolsonaro, who see that the gangs are increasing because of the increasing drug trade, when in reality the middle class, which is primarily white, and the international drug trade are fueling more gang activity in the favelas.
Chris Silva, in his article, Brazil's just elected their version of Donald Trump, highlights President-elect Jair Bolsonaro's main notions, which defined his campaign, all which manifest a striking resemblance to those of President Trump. Like the U.S. President, Bolsonaro's expressed controversial encouragement for gun possession, demonstrated a degrading opinion on feminists and female pride, and portrayed the lower classes of Brazil as a threat to those of higher economic wealth. Evidently, Bolsonaro's policies would seem to only worsen the current state of devastation that Brazil is already in. Goldstein notes in Laughter Out of Place that gun use is already widespread, with illegal distribution of weapons by urban favela gangs who sell to recruits as young as teenagers, while there's also a major increasing prevalence in the middle and upper class societies. Goldstein also demonstrates how the upper class addresses the issues within the lower class, which instead of being centered toward the restoration of its poverty, instead focuses on its violence and as a threat to the reputation of Brazilian society. Goldstein describes police engagement in the favelas as internal war zones. As the state's officers compete with the drug lords, it demonstrates superiority, resulting in unnecessary and excessive force within the favelas by police. Apparently, it is typical of Brazilian governmentality for police to distinguish between the kinds of rules to be applied when dealing with different socioeconomic divisions within the population. To depict the typical cultural condescension among women in Brazil, Goldstein provides exemplary constituents like Marilia, whose experience with being a victim of relationship abuse and affairs was only a conventional occurrence in her life and culture.
As we have seen in Laughter Out of Place and in today's political climate in Brazil, the country's welfare is in great peril. While Goldstein showed that the conditions in Brazil in 2003 were very bad in terms of gangs, inequality, injustice, and gender relations, Rousseff's impeachment and Bolsonaro's election highlight that the conditions may be even worse than they were then. The fact that Bolsonaro's only opponent was Da Silva, who was in prison at the time for government corruption, shows that Brazil has no good options to choose from as a leader. And unless a major change occurs, the Brazilians are looking at another several years of mistreatment by their government.